So the 240 panel is a pathway to success for those reentering society based on workforce development. There's a book by Jeff Korzenik called Untapped Talent. Jeff was one of our presenters at the Symposium in 2019 that talks about how one of the biggest talent markets out there is people reentering society from prison. And he presents strictly an economic reason, a financial reason for hiring people that are getting out of prison. So Kyle, I will turn it over to you to explore what workforce development can do in our move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyle Benson-Smith. I'm the founder and executive director of a small nonprofit in Kansas City, Missouri called Determination Incorporated. We started in 2018, and we help formerly incarcerated people start and grow businesses. I'll tell a quick story just to set the scene a little bit. When I started doing this work, I worked in Kansas City's entrepreneurship community out of UMKC at an organization called KC SourceLink that acts as a central hub for all the entrepreneurial support organizations around town. And I'd heard about mass incarceration and how way too many people were in prison and how everybody comes home and how difficult reentry is, as we've been talking about today. So I started to get to know the reentry community here in Kansas City, many of those organizations that you saw represented. And when I first started doing workshops inside of prisons for residents, folks who are currently incarcerated, I thought I was so cool and exciting and inspirational because I would say, if you can't find a job, create a job. And that sounds really cool, but it's actually not that great of advice. It's not quite as actionable and practical as I would like it to be. So my pitch has gotten a lot better since then, and that's only thanks to people like everyone who we'll talk to today, and many of you out there in the crowd who have been working for a long time to help our brothers and sisters coming home from incarceration find and keep employment. So in just a moment, I'm gonna ask everyone up here to introduce themselves, but then I'm actually gonna turn the tables and ask you guys some questions. So get ready to raise your hands and participate a little bit. But before we do, we'll start here. Grant, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
I'm a systems engineer at Splashtacular. I'm also the founder of two startups, Sunset Systems and Collective Conscience. Collective Conscience is a tech consultation startup that we do some AI stuff and consultation for data analytics. And then Sunset Systems is a design and engineering firm. At Splashtacular, we do water slide design, engineering, and manufacturing.
And can you tell us a little bit about your story? We'll dive into it a lot more later.
How far do you want me to go?
The four-sentence version.
The four-sentence version. I just got out of Lansing Correctional Facility last August and have been, at that point, trying to figure everything out. I spent 7 years in there, and we'll talk about it more when you're ready.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, hi, I'm Andrew Weisberg, Director of Community Engagement over at the KC Chamber. In my role, I help oversee our workforce development efforts, entrepreneurship, and along with my colleague John Jenks, who's our Director of Public Policy, I help lead our Workforce Opportunities for Returning Citizens program, or WORK initiative, which helps to serve as an intermediary between employers and returning citizens and service providers.
And I'm Jim Eccles. During the past 2 years, I've served as Executive Director of Reaching Out From Within, and that's been quite a challenge and quite an exciting opportunity. Prior to that time, I served 5 years as a volunteer mentor with the Kansas Department of Corrections Mentoring for Success program, followed by 2 years as a member of the Kansas Sentencing Commission before arriving here. So quite a bit of background there in that area, and it's something that I have a real strong interest in, similar to earlier comment regarding entrepreneurship and workforce development are things I think can make a big difference as far as a path of success for our returning citizens.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Stephen Owens. I am the state representative for the 74th House District down in South Central Kansas. I currently serve as the chairman for the Corrections and Juvenile Justice Committee, having replaced the late Russ Jennings, who served in that capacity for better than a decade. I, too, am an entrepreneur. I own and operate multiple companies in various industries, but have worked for the past 20-plus years with pre- and post-trial individuals involved in the system. So some unique perspective on what lands people there and what we can do to keep them out of the system. So I really look forward to having a broader conversation about the things we're doing on a state level to improve the system.
My name's Nicholas Wyman. Sue Ellen today started today talking about Germany, and you probably picked up my accent and realised this isn't someone from the Midwest, but hopefully I'll add some national and international perspective. Our organisation, IWSI, or Institute for Workplace Skills, provide technical expertise. We're a 501c3, and we're very focused on apprenticeship, and I look forward to introducing this idea of earn and learn, and the popularity of apprenticeship has grown, and I think we can talk about how that may be able to be incorporated into some of the existing initiatives and programs.
Yeah, clearly a lot to learn from these gentlemen. But like I said, first I want to ask all of you questions. And the reason I want to do this is because more than any other topic that we've covered today we're really going to be talking about folks who are coming home. We're going to be talking about folks who are out in the communities, who are in our neighborhoods, who are in our workplaces. And so it's no longer, hey, how are you guys treating folks while they're in your institutions? It's now, how are we treating folks when they're in our neighborhoods, when they are our fellow coworkers? So I want to get a read for who's in the room today. Can you please raise your hand if you work in a prison? Thank you. Raise your hand if you work in probation and parole. Cool. I encourage everyone to look around a little bit while we're going through these questions. Where are my reentry brothers and sisters? Who works in reentry? Any other nonprofit folks out there? What about for-profit people? Employers, do we have business owners, folks who make hiring decisions? Employees, anybody work for the man? Shouldn't that be like everyone else in the room? Yeah, there we go. How many of you out there have been incarcerated before? Can we please give everyone with their hand up a round of applause? Welcome home. We're glad you're home. We've asked so many times today for folks who, with stories like yours, to be vulnerable, to put themselves out there. So I want to give the rest of us the chance to be a little bit vulnerable. How many of you have had or do have an incarcerated friend or loved one? Yeah, a lot more hands went up there. How many of you have committed a crime and not been caught? Oh, there we go. Everyone's thinking about it. Did I get... How many of you have made a decision that you regret? How many of you have been a victim of a crime before? Wow. How many of you have seen a TV show about crime? Okay, I wasn't sure if I was going to ask this one, but I'm going to. Has anyone in here ever been on Cops before? Okay, no. That was going to be a fun story if somebody raised their hand. All right, so the next question, the answer is going to be in 3 parts, but I want to know how many of you know, does your employer hire formerly incarcerated people? Is your employer able, so let's do yes first. Okay, now let's do no. Department of Corrections people, can you guys hire formerly incarcerated people? Maybe some, we're thinking about it. Okay, how many are like, aren't sure, you're at maybe? All right, well, that's what we're going to be covering today. And like I mentioned earlier, more than any other topic, we really have to think about what all of these big ideas mean in our own lives. Because all of the hopey changiness that we've heard today really doesn't matter if we don't take it back into our communities, if we don't take it back into our workplaces. We each have to embody all of the progress that we've heard today. So that's what I want to talk about. Andrew, I want to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work initiative that the KC Chamber is doing? And then from there, can you tell us a little bit about talking with employers in the Kansas City area about hiring formerly incarcerated people? How did those conversations go?
Yeah, sure, thanks, Kyle. So about 3 years ago, some of our volunteer leaders took an annual trip over to Boston and saw some innovative things that were happening there around reducing crime and violence that the business community was doing. So they came back and charged us with, how can we do this here in the metro? And what we found was, this wasn't relatively new to the chamber world. There were other chambers involved in this space, some in LA, some in Ohio, some in South Carolina, each one kind of doing a specific thing, some around policy work, some around educating employers. So we took a step back and developed this pilot program called the Work Initiative to really look at how can we help reduce recidivism as a collective business community through providing impactful, meaningful employment opportunities. We did this with a pilot with about 6 service providers, along with 8 employers across a variety of sectors. We did that purposefully because we didn't want to, pigeonhole anyone into saying, you can only work in construction or manufacturing, but, we had some IT firms, logistics and distribution as well. And really it was as we put it together, it was a 3-part process. 1, we wanted to just pilot it and see what works, what doesn't. 2, we wanted to get some real success stories in the second year. And then as we enter year 3, we want to highlight those success stories and share with the greater business community, hey, do you have workforce needs? Here's a solution for you. And as we continue this work, we're always trying to get more than 2,000 members on board, seeing this as a viable talent solution. Because to the second part of the question, what we're constantly hearing is, where did all the workers go? Nobody knows. We went from a 3-year cycle of, one of the tightest labor markets in history to everyone, closing up shop and people getting laid off, and now we had a dearth of employees, and now we're back in a situation where people just disappeared from the workforce. But this presents a real opportunity in that, we're finding that as people get released and people re-enter society, there's true opportunities to enter fields that, are greater in capacity and high need. So what we're seeing in the metro, as of, I think last month, there were over 100,000 job openings. Unemployment's at about 3.3%. Our growth is about 3%, but that's significantly lower when we look at our 15 peer metros. And really, the way we can increase that growth is to continue to get talent and attract and retain and continue to grow our workforce. And in order to do that, we have to find talent pools. And really, when we talk to employers, a number of times, from an employer perspective, HR folks are usually, a one-person shop at many businesses. In some instances, it's the owner with no HR experience at all. So it's a matter of getting them educated, getting them up to speed on the returning citizen model, helping them understand probation and parole, helping them understand, what it is to be a returning citizen, helping them understand how to access this work pool, and trying to make it as easy as possible. And that's really the goal of the Work Initiative, is to try to make this a viable talent pool and make it as easy as possible for businesses to tap into this.
Andrew, as you've been talking to employers, what have you learned about why these policies exist in the first place? Why aren't companies able to hire formerly incarcerated people? It seems to me like when I see advertisements on TV, if they're talking about service providers or something, they say, don't worry, we background check, which is just shorthand for we keep the dangerous people away. But why do companies have these things in their HR handbooks in the first place?
Well, there's a couple of issues on this. One, certain industries do have legislative ties to it, such as healthcare and licensing issues around that. Some people do receive, federal contracts, which do have some limitations on who they can hire and contractors they can pick up. But I think for a large portion of businesses, it comes down to a stigma. And there's a stigma attached to, returning citizens and HR folks not having a clear understanding of the true understanding of it, and really, truly having the knowledge to move forward. And it's interesting because we had a conversation with an HR group, and they were going through, we can't find talent, we got to find all these different people. They talked about veterans, they talked about disabled workers, how do we increase DEI? But then they came back to us, and we brought up the Work Initiative, and then they said, this is really interesting. Actually, in our entire group, we didn't talk about this at all. And that, I think, is the part that we need to change, and that's the goal of the Work Initiative and the marketing piece and getting that information out there, is getting this in the minds of people, and something that we're realizing, and as we tool and we're having to rework the initiative to make it more successful, bring on more businesses, but I think the conversation needs to change. This isn't, it is a great social justice imperative, and it's the right thing to do, but the bottom line is, this is how you solve your workforce issues. This is talent coming out into the community every year on a consistent basis that you have the opportunity to train and mold and tie into your business. and it's happening. So, I mean, you need workers, here's workforce. So we're trying to change that narrative. You know, it's not you're hiring returning citizens, it's accessing workers.
Thank you, Andrew. Grant, I want to ask you a few questions. What was your workforce experience before you went to prison?
Before I went to prison, I had actually pretty vast workforce experience. I kind of had the usual, I went to prison at 22, so I had the usual like working at restaurants and all that, but I had also started my own personal training business. I was in college for biochemistry. I actually got rated my last semester of my senior year. I got a little too good at biochemistry, which is why I went to prison. So I had extensive experience in some other areas that I was lucky for that a lot of guys don't have.
And we heard on the last panel all the innovative things that are going on in corrections in order to prepare currently incarcerated people for the workforce. I'm curious, what was your personal experience while you were in prison in Kansas? What were you doing to prepare yourself? What programs were you taking advantage of for when you get home?
So it's the interesting thing about all of this is, to me and a lot of the guys you'll ask or deal with, and most of the guys in the room, they leveraged what they got in prison. And most of that leverage comes from two of the tables you see up front, Randy Reinhardt, Cheryl Reinhardt, Zephyr Products, and everybody involved with that, and a few other private industry companies that are involved in the prison system. If you aren't eligible for those types of things, you end up in a situation where, for one, you don't get any skills, you're left with programs who really don't prepare you for anything, or you're uneligible to get into the programs that are available. When they started offering college classes at Lansing, I was not eligible for them to get funding, and they would have been prohibitively expensive otherwise, because I had a private industry job and I made too much money, despite the fact that I only took home 50% of my paycheck after taxes and what the prison takes from me for room and board. So I couldn't take programs that would make me better because of other obstacles in the way. And that is kind of the situation you're always running into. In my situation, I ended up in a great position at Zephyr Products that leveraged the skills that I was trying to learn anyways. I could sit in my bunk and read and learn how to code by hand and learn how to do engineering work, and then take that and use Zephyr as a vehicle by which to propel myself into the positions I wanted to be in. That's not the normal situation. That's not the situation at all. We're mostly expecting guys to pull themselves up by the bootstraps when they're wearing prison Crocs. There's nothing that they're allowed to do that they actually enjoy. And if they get into a position at a PI job, and luckily they get to do something every day and make a little money, they usually don't want to do that as a career. They're in a position where, like, okay, they're running a press break, or maybe they're doing sewing, or whatever they may be doing, but that is not a long-term situation for them. They accept that job because it's money, they're in prison, and that's what they're going to deal with. But when they get out, that is, if that's the job they end up with in some sort of field, that is going to lead to them coming back to prison. Because you're asking a population who has spent their entire life figuring out how to not work to do a job that they hate. And that's not going to work out.
What was your experience of getting a job when you got home?
So once again, just like every formerly incarcerated person in this room that I know, we leveraged our connections from being in prison. Lucky enough, I work for another company that's related to Zephyr, and the ownership of Zephyr is Splashtacular. So I was able to, when I was at Zephyr, see, okay, here's a path. I'm going to try to leverage this path. If it works, that'll be great. However, my first year before I got out, I was on LinkedIn. I had my girlfriend applying for jobs. I was putting myself out there, and I had skills that far surpassed most of what people were asking for, and I couldn't get even a single response. So without being able to leverage those connections, without being lucky to be in the right place at the right time, and being lucky because I was driven just genetically, I don't know how these guys are doing it and being successful. And they're not, because they're all failing. And so I see this room full of beautiful people wanting to help us out. But how do we come together and actually make real progress work for what's going on? We have to look at the situation differently. We have to do what we're doing now. We have to do the Zephyr products. We have to do the PI jobs. We have to do those things. We have to do something different, though, that's not working for the majority of the other people involved in the prison system. So we have to look at it and look at the data and leverage our new technologies and get more out of our investment in this prison system.
What are some of the difficulties? You mentioned people who don't make it, who aren't able to take advantage of the relationships they build in prison, who aren't able to get a job when they get home. What are some of the difficulties, barriers, or lack of experience that are holding them back?
When you start doing methamphetamine when you're 8 years old, that's when your brain stops developing. And we're asking guys to be a man at 40 when they didn't learn how to be a preteen. So we have to start and be able to cluster what the problem is. There's not a one-size-fits-all problem for everybody. We can use machine learning, we can use AI, we can use the vast public profiles we have of these guys, and then we can do actual proper psychiatric evaluations, which there's none of being done. And we can look at these and say, okay, this is the cluster that we see you in. And then this is how we are going to leverage you in this cluster. I could have sat in my unit at the prison and put everybody in a cluster, and my brain is not a computer. So we can do these things and find solutions for different groups that can propel them forward and actually get trajectories towards things they're interested in and give them something to actually lose. They come out and get a job for 12 hours a day that they hate. Well, guess what, guys? Being a criminal is actually pretty fun. So we got to find something they enjoy. So they have something to lose and they don't want to go back to that lifestyle because they actually just want to live a happy life like everybody else.
Thank you, Grant. Jim, from your position as the executive director of Reaching Out from Within, how do you see men preparing for the workforce whenever they get home?
Yeah, a couple of things, and I'm glad I've got one of our state representatives sitting next to me here, because a lot of politicians, not just in Kansas, but around the country, feel that if an individual has an opportunity for employment, that most of the issues and problems as far as quality of life upon reentry is settled. But what we found at Reaching Out from Within, historically going back to 1982, is that it takes a certain amount of pre-release preparation for that individual as well. And Greg mentioned earlier the Blue Book, which I hope is still circulating around for you to take a look. A lot of the Blue Book information and chapters pertain to pre-release and issues of problem solving that deal largely with addictions, substance abuse, domestic violence, and basically just solving problems. These are things that have to be part of a program for pre-release so that once an individual is released back into society, there's a certain foundational aspect of what they've learned to prepare them to be more able to integrate with family, with the larger community, and particularly as far as employment and re-entering and being productive and having a pathway to success. And so we look at both sides, both the pre-release period as well as the release, and we know that that job won't necessarily be sustainable, and the retention will not be there if the individual has not had adequate pre-release preparation. And so that's what I find, and that's what I see.
Yeah, to talk more about the release period, so there are many Reaching Out from Within alum here today. What have you seen amongst your alumni as they're getting home and getting jobs? What are the most common barriers you see to getting and keeping employment?
Again, I think if you leave the political aspect of it and you go to the employers, a lot of employers have preconceived notions of what this returning citizen may bring to the workplace. Will he or she bring chaos or disrupt the workplace? A lot of the stereotypes of the worst fears are kind of coming together where they have a perception of individuals who are returning from incarceration. The best way to combat that is, again, preparation for pre-release, number one. Number two, once you have re-entered society, you've served your time and hopefully can be successful in completing all of your post-release requirements as far as supervision and those items. Once you've done that, hold your head up and respect yourself, because if you want respect from others, including employers, your own self-respect is the beginning of that step. These preconceived notions, you can combat those by not behaving in such a way that further emphasizes or reaffirms those very negative stereotypes that many individuals and employers may have. And so upon returning and coming back into society, just do those things that you need to do, and most of us know what we should do. Sometimes it's hard to make that commitment and stick with it, but that's what it's going to take to make things turn around. We have one advantage coming out of COVID that's a big one, and that is right now, most employers I speak with in the private sector particularly, 80 or 90% are having great difficulty finding employees to fill positions. This is a time where many folks are even holding back and waiting for COVID and a lot of other things to change. But this is an opportunity for returning citizens and other underrepresented groups in society to take advantage of those workforce shortages and get busy and get down and be the first one in line to take these positions, because it may not always be that way. And while we've got that advantage and some people are holding back, this is a time to take advantage of that. I myself, during the time I was a mentor with the volunteer mentor with Mentoring for Success, state of Kansas, I encouraged the individuals I work with who were returning home, I encouraged them to volunteer a half a day or a day each week as a volunteer at their church, at a food pantry, at a clothes closet. Just volunteer for a period of time. That way you got a couple of things. You get into a routine, you got someone who's observing the volunteer work you're doing who can serve as a reference. And finally, I would go with them to introduce them to prospective employers. Say, this individual has volunteered the past 3 months, every week, 1 day a week, as a volunteer. Do you think if you hire him, he will come to work for you and be where he should be? Just getting into a routine. So those things make a difference. Right now, I think because of the need for society to have the workforce, the opportunities are better. And let's face it, we've got many more people who are deaths in society than births right now.
Thank you, Jim. Stephen, building off of that, as you hear Kansas employers with their labor needs, with their workforce needs, how do you show them how the Kansas Department of Corrections is preparing them for the workforce?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. You know, there's a lot of initiatives going on. As I've had the opportunity, this is my 4th session, so towards the end of my 2nd term. And I've had the opportunity to learn an enormous amount about what KDOC does, how they operate, what Secretary Zamuda and his staff are doing to try to move this forward. They're constantly looking at how do we reduce recidivism, right? How do we get people out? How do we keep them out? How do we help them be successful? Because we know, and I'm sure some of these statistics have been thrown out there already today, that 97% of inmates are getting out. So 97% of people that are currently incarcerated will be back in our communities. How do we want them to act when they're in our communities? We also know that you're 1/3 less likely to recidivate if you're able to make a living wage when you get out, okay? So all these statistics show the importance of getting work. So what are we doing? First and foremost, it's building upon these public-private partnerships that already exist. We want people to be able to get a job while they're incarcerated, to be able to learn the skills they need to transition right out. We've passed legislation that builds upon those very opportunities because exactly what Jim here was talking about. We know there's a workforce shortage. We know there's a labor problem, and this is a great opportunity. There are workforce centers being discussed and worked on funding as it relates to the Lansing Correctional Facility with the Chambers of Commerce in Wyandotte and Johnson County in helping to develop that. We talked just this year about what's called a Work Keys program, which is a program where it's similar to an ACT test that you take for college, but the Work Key program is the ability for an individual that is incarcerated to take this test to really figure out where they fit. What skills do they have? How can they build upon that skill set once they get out? You know, there are so many things that we can look at and say, does this still make sense, right? The criminal justice system has changed so much. Why is it that somebody that was convicted of a drug felony can't be a waitress at a location that serves alcohol? It makes absolutely no sense. Those are the things that we need to fix. We need to get to the root cause, obviously, of what lands people in jail: mental health, substance use, and we've made tremendous strides in that over the years. I could talk for hours about the different things that we have done or continue to do. Most recently, last year, I introduced a piece of legislation that even went further than ban the box to start the conversation, and that is not allowing a criminal history to be the sole determinant for your employment. Now, that fired a lot of people up, and everybody with a professional license embodying the entire state was all against that. But you've got to have the conversation of, does that sole barrier really make sense? We're working on things like the drug offender registry. You know, Kansas has a drug offender registry, a violent offender registry, and a sex offender registry. You know how many other states have a drug offender registry? None. Okay? So finding a path off of that for people, taking some of the steps to help people get off those registries, to get their history expunged, being able to move forward in the workplace. I could talk for hours. This is something that is so very important that many people in Topeka really want to continue to work towards and address.
As you're talking to employers in the state, have you spoken to any who have hired formerly incarcerated people who've explained why it's a benefit to their company? And what do those conversations sound like?
You know, I actually sat down a couple months ago with AGCO, which is a large producer in Harvey County. They make gleaner combines, hay and forage equipment, has the things. I put them in touch with KDOC because they want to partner and create one of these public-private partnerships within the Hutchinson Correctional Facility. I think this is one of the ancillary benefits, and I'm glad that we can actually say that there are some benefits to this pandemic because there's been a whole lot of drawbacks. One of the ancillary benefits is, one, we have a lower population in our KDOC system right now that gives us a little bit of breathing room to work on some of these problems. But then we've also seen the desperate need from our employers, and they're willing to open their mind. They're willing to recognize that redemption truly should exist for the majority of people that are coming out of jail and out of the prison system, and how can they be part of that redemption process. So yeah, I continue to meet with employers that are broadening their own horizons and thinking differently about it.
Yeah, thank you. Nick, I'm going to come to you. With your lovely accent, you can just talk about whatever you want to, and we'll just listen. But perhaps specifically, we could talk about apprenticeships. Can you tell us some about your work in that area and where you see that it could be applied to provide value to our communities and to formerly incarcerated people?
Sure. So I'm not going to say crikey or anything like that. So really bringing it home, so we've got this labour market situation, as Jim pointed out at the moment, which is unprecedented for employers. And this is really where the opportunity lies, because this is not about a philanthropic play or doing the right thing. A program, any program, workforce program, that is heavily reliant, and I say majority heavily reliant on a funding source from government, tends to be at risk, because when that money runs out or things change, the programs fall apart. So apprenticeship is a unique model, which is it's actually employer funded and employer led. Now, why I say it's employer funded is because employers have a job that needs to be done. And so they are willing to pay for that. Now, we need to have a whole lot of services and support. And so when I talk apprenticeship, I use the word mentored apprenticeship. And also I sometimes throw in the word modern mentored apprenticeship, because just like the misconceptions, and there's a great report there, by the way, Jim, perceptions are not reality. And then I can see it filling up full of all these perceptions and myths. Don't call it myth busting, you might get sued. But all these myths that employers have, and the reasons and barriers why they won't employ people. But with apprenticeship, some people think that it's, either the television show of the former president or building and construction. And building and construction jobs, once again, another myth is that returning citizens would all be interested in working on a construction site. I don't know what your experience down there is, but this is a great job and this is a great pathway. You can apprentice in pretty much any occupation that you can think of. So I challenge someone later on to say to me, have you, name an industry or name an occupation, and I'll send you something that will show that someone's either doing it or trying to do it. And so there is a huge opportunity. But the key to this apprenticeship is your earning and learning. So this is where someone, I should say, an apprenticeship is not another, and there are some really good training programs, but at the end of the day, they're just training programs. Participants end up with a certificate, but they don't end up with a job. And I think that any accreditation that you can do along the way, and particularly for self-motivated people, that is fantastic. But an apprenticeship is a job. You actually start to earn and learn. So you're working and you're also learning. So what does that mean in practical sense? So a federally registered apprenticeship is 2,000 hours minimum, which is about 1 year. But you can actually start that 2,000 hours. So if you look at it in the context of school, you can actually start an apprenticeship while still in high school as a high school senior. You've got to be over the age of, I think it's over the age of 16. So you could start to do some of your on and off the job. So I can't see why there couldn't be the apprenticeship model, couldn't be transitioned or adapted. And there's a lot of elements. But then there is called the related instruction. And here is another huge opportunity. The last year or two, technology has advanced. You might have heard of the CEO of Shopify say that technology has advanced 10 years in 10 months. So virtual reality, Oculus headsets. You can now put on an Oculus headset and you don't have to have a multi-million-dollar training facility to show somebody. I had my 11-year-old last week. Better than somebody else in the room who then I gave the headset to. He failed dismally, but my 11-year-old was able to change the brake rotors on a vehicle using virtual reality, and I thought, can he do that in the real world? So I haven't let him loose on my brakes just yet, but I'll do it under supervision. But there's ways that you can learn. So classroom learning, traditional person-to-person learning, but you can also learn online. There's some fantastic online platforms. So it's really in program design, and there is no silver bullet or secret sauce. I haven't heard anything in the room today that suggests to me that setting up apprenticeship programs is not possible with all the elements that exist. Mentoring and coaching is absolutely, we all know that is going to increase somebody's chance of succeeding in a job, regardless of their background. The power of partnerships from the previous speakers. I mean, you can't do this alone, employers can't do this alone. So there are plenty of different ways that this could be done, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with Jim. Stephen, I would say if there's anyone here from the federal government, I mean, if we're waiting for the federal government to solve this problem, we might be waiting a long time. It really needs to be done at the state level. That's where the jobs are. It really is something that's going to be done in local communities. There are already employers who can stand up as the shining light and examples and keep telling the stories, keep having events and conferences like this. But I'm all in if anybody is interested in developing an apprenticeship style program. We're really interested to talk about how that might look and where we could pilot and see who we could get to come to the table with some funding. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about it.
Stephen, I'll ask you to follow up in a second, but let me direct the question toward Grant first. You got a job with a private employer while you were in prison. Can you tell me about how that came about, what the training process was, and what your experience was?
So, well, then we'll take a step back to where I started. I started out at a prison that was essentially a work camp, where the majority of the camp left the facility for 8 to 10 hours a day and did hard labor, where it was cutting trees down, cleaning up parks, whatever it was, and you got paid 60 cents a day to do that. And that camp didn't have any private industry jobs other than a couple, and those were usually locked down by people who weren't allowed to leave the facility. And I was told by my unit team, this is where you will do your entire time, you will not leave. And I wasn't willing to take that as an answer. I knew there was opportunities elsewhere. I kept growing. I committed to my disciplinary action being clean, which is majority luck, not just behaving properly. And that's an important description, because most of my buddies in prison, extremely well behaved, all had disciplinary action for one reason or another, and it wasn't because they weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I got lucky on that. And then the opportunity came up. Zephyr needed somebody, they needed 2 people with computer skill ability. And KDOC's job was to bring people with those skills to them and supply them with their workforce, and they couldn't find anybody at Lansing. They reached out to every prison in the state, that KDOC did, to try to find some of these skills, and they found Brandon Herring and Grant Hamel in Winfield Correctional Facility and said, do you want to go to Lansing? And Brandon and I looked at each other and were like, for what? And they said, well, there's a company, we can't tell you who they are, they've got jobs, and they pay minimum wage. I said, well, it's better than 60 cents a day. So we go up to Lansing, and my first night there, they're having Friday night fights in the bathroom of the unit I am, and my bunkie's smoking crack out of a crack pipe. And I looked at Brandon and I said, we may have made the wrong decision here. Luckily, it ended up not being the wrong decision. It worked out great for both of us and able to leverage that. But we got lucky because of our circumstances before prison were good enough that we were able to learn skills that were valuable at that time. I was never going to leave that facility if I didn't have that skills. That's what I was told by my unit team. That was for sure the situation, and that was the status quo at that time. So luck has played into my life so much that I'm extremely concerned for everybody else involved in the situation, because nobody can be that lucky.
And Stephen, when you're talking to employers who are interested in partnering with the Department of Corrections, what sort of support is the department able to provide? How do those relationships come about?
Well, first of all, I love the mentorship process. You know, even whether you're in prison or you're out of prison or wherever, we all need people in our lives that can help us not reinvent the wheel, make the same mistakes that they made. We all need that. We see these programs developed around mentorship, even with entire families that are mentoring other families. And so I really look forward to exploring that more, because that is so incredibly valuable. And anything that we can do to engage that workforce, to take on kind of that role of you know, how can we help these people? How can we help people realize their own self-worth? I think that's what, you know, he was kind of talking about a little bit, was where is your skill set? How can it be utilized? But even for those people without a skill set, how do we find out where their skill set will play into the workforce once they do get out? And how can we help facilitate that while they're incarcerated, while they're working through finding their way out? Is it work release facilities? I mean, Kansas unfortunately has one work release facility right now, and that is down in Sedgwick County. So if you're going to go through a work release process where you're learning some of these skills and you're increasing that trust on your way out and working full-time, there's only one place to do that. So we're exploring more of those opportunities as well. So it's that further engagement of employers and having them become part of recognizing that the solution lies with the 8,000 plus inmates in the system.
Do we have any questions out there? I want to get mics moving around. I see one in the middle.
Oh, hi. Ooh, I don't like to hear that, but okay. It's not a very big incentive, but just to make people aware, when you're talking to employers, there's something called the Workers' Opportunity Tax Credit. Employees can get up to $2,400 per employee if they hire them within 1 year of release. So at least it's a talking point to help incentivize. And also, I think Mark was talking earlier about like an insurance or something. There is a federal bonding program where it's up to $5,000 of loss if you hire someone formerly incarcerated and they commit some crime against your company within the first 6 months. So they're not very big incentives, but there are talking points for when you're trying to convince employers that there are some benefits financially. So, also, and Bob Barker goes to national, just to toot their horn, it's the Barker family, not me, but we go to national conventions and try to use their hiring practices and their open hiring practices to convince other corrections vendors that they have a role to play in reducing recidivism. And so there's a portion of the Bob Barker for-profit company that goes into the nonprofit to reduce recidivism. So I see some folks in uniform around here, so just, you know, put a bug in your in your vendors' ears. And I know there's money in their budgets as well to help fund programs. So, so anyway, just little incentives and talking points. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Yeah, question over here.
I want to thank you guys for being up there. It's interesting, all men. Coming at you. No. State Rep, you mentioned that there are, in the state of Kansas, there is not a sentence reduction or an offender registry for drugs, but there is a offender registry for sex offenders. And back probably, I think a year ago, I spoke via Zoom in regards to reduction for sex offenders. And there were some offenders that crimes or whatever were being reduced, but sex offenders never came up. And I thought, you know, if somebody's on the SO registry, have not reoffended, on a good path, why can't their tier be reduced at a certain point in time or something? For whatever reason, all sex offenders are lumped into one basket, and that's not right. So I don't know where to go with that one and what you might be able to do or whatever.
No, that's great. You're absolutely right. And I do want to clarify that Kansas is the only one with a drug
Oh,
offender
the only one,
registry.
yes, correct.
So we are the only ones, but we've all got to remember, and I'm going to talk about the gorilla in the room when it comes to politics, and that is politics.
Politics,
right?
yes.
Politics plays a big role in the criminal justice system. And so it takes a long process sometimes of educating. Because in the legislature, it's important to know that we work in very specific silos. So I'm chairman of Corrections Juvenile Justice. I also sit on Judiciary and the Appropriations Committee, so the state checkbook. So those are the three things that I know really, really well. If you want to ask me about K-12 budget, I got nothing for you. If you want to ask me about Health and Human Services, I don't know much at all either. And so we get really good in those silos, and then it becomes our responsibility to then educate those around us, to educate our colleagues. We have seen, and we've actually had legislation introduced that did address some of the sex offender, violent offender registries and create an off-ramp with the drug offender registry. That never would make it across the floor for political reasons. So what I did this year, my first year as chairman, I said, okay, let's pare that back. Let's take a smaller bite at the apple, and let's start with the drug offender registry, because I think everybody understands more so addiction, and that we can overcome addiction, and that we can change the way our lives are. And so the House Bill 2674, a matter of fact, I just talked about it this morning, is likely to pass this week, and I'm confident that the governor is going to sign it, because it says, look, that's a 15-year registry process. But if you've been on it for 5 years and you've rehabilitated, you've got a job, you're doing the things that you need to do, then why are we still holding you back? Right. With that comes the ability to get an expungement of your record. Because if you're on the registry, you can't get expungement for 15 years either. So in some ways, the laws that we put on the books are very counterproductive. We do it in the name of tough on crime, but we've lost the logic of what is smart on crime and how we can actually help people change their lives. And so that's where my focus is at.
Thank you. And to the young man with the red shirt on, you are exactly right, because you had an opportunity of a lifetime where you had the ability to be able to step into a job with Splash because of somebody you knew or whatever. The DOC has some awesome programs, and the ladies that are in my program, and the GROW program, I have one that went through the coding program in TCF. She got out, interviewed for a job, and they said, oh, you're perfect. They did her background. Oh, we can't hire you. Now she's working in a warehouse. We had another lady that went through a program at TCF, and she got her degree in Microsoft computers, et cetera, went to a big corporation, and, oh, you're perfect for this job. Did her background. Well, we can't hire you because of your background. What's wrong with this picture? These girls have the qualifications. They're getting the training they need. I applaud the programs that are available, or the classes or whatever that's being taught on the inside. But when they come to the outside, nobody wants to help them. Where's the programs? Where are these companies that hire the females that give them a job besides a warehouse job?
Let me ask you a question while
Yeah.
you're Mike. With those particular stories that you mentioned,
Yes.
were you guys able to ask the question to the employer, why can't you hire someone with a criminal background? Or was it just, it's corporate, there's nothing we can do about it?
That's what they told the girls, and that's where it stayed.
Thank you. Question up front. While the mic is on the way, I want to ask, based off of your first question in our discussion here, with the sex offender list and stuff, I was thinking about this last week during the Senate hearings. It's definitely the case, we mentioned politics being the gorilla in the room, that people with criminal histories, particularly violent offenders or folks with sexual offenses, there's still a lot of fear-mongering going on in our politics. And I learned from Oprah that the opposite of fear is love. But I think it may be too much to ask a lot of people who are currently in the fear state, stick with me here, to jump all the way from fear to love, but maybe they can make it to curiosity. And curiosity is the first step, maybe in the direction of love. But with that in mind, the other thing that we've heard today, and your question brought it up, is that with actual relationships, when people know people across differences and across backgrounds, things can happen and people can move forward in life. So with all of that in mind, Jim, what is your advice to employers who are curious about hiring formerly incarcerated people?
Well, I would say, first of all, I've had a number of conversations with the business community, chambers of commerce, and even some of the staff at Koch Industries. Koch, of course, is about the largest and one of the first to ban the box as far as their applications. They have, in their research, come to the conclusion that there's only a nominal difference between the success of those who are returning citizens from incarceration and employees who have never had criminal convictions and so on. And so that's a pretty big example of a survey to show that. I think, again, that the pressure on employers to find good help is so strong right now that it's going to be pressure going forward, and there's going to be an incentive for employers to be a little more relaxed in what their normal requirements might be as far as pre-qualification and so on. Because again, we don't have the population. We need 2.2 children coming from each family situation to replace the deaths that are taking place, and we're running about 1.8. So we're in a lot of trouble as far as keeping a robust economy.
Kyle, can I chime in and just ask a question a little bit off that? Does insurance play a role in that? And maybe somebody can answer. Does your liability or your errors and omissions insurance for a business play some role in saying that you can't hire these people? Does anybody know that out there?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Owens, that's exactly what I was going to talk about. I'm a member of the Missouri and Kansas Plaintiff Bar and Defense Bar. You mentioned the 800-pound gorilla. Grant mentioned, 60 cents a day. And the 800-pound gorilla, they're twins, and they both pertain to corporations. And one is relevant to the previous discussion topic. But the 800-pound gorilla is politics, but it's also laws and exposure to liability. And I think the good doctor mentioned something about that. Why are they turning them down? And if you come into my office with this type of issue, I don't practice this type of law, but I could, my response would be, I help corporations all the time. I help small businesses all the time. Small business owners employ the vast majority of people in our middle western states. The risk aversion that they have is not that oftentimes they don't want to hire someone who is a returning citizen. It is the exposure to liability if they do. If anyone screws up, you deliver pizzas, you work in a laundromat, think of any function that you could possibly have for a person, a returning citizen, and something goes wrong. There's an altercation, which can happen with anyone because as we're seeing after COVID, there's a lot of rude customers, things can happen. If something happens, and in the discovery process of a lawsuit, after someone gets hurt, slip and falls, gets hit with a car, and they find that there is a criminal history there, it's called negligent hiring. So a lawyer can say, I am going to sue your company for negligent hiring, and because this person had this background, you either knew or should have known, therefore negligent, that this person was dangerous or had a bad driving record, had a criminal record, and that's why. So in a corporate, I'm a former corporate attorney. Corporations are by nature risk averse, and if I'm honest, cowardly. They want to avoid any type of exposure. Now, if you think of people like us, right, small business people, right, we will take those risks, but there's a lot of people who won't take those risks, and this goes to Representative Owens and what your work is doing. If we can create laws, and we have nationally, not statewide, insulating big pharma for creating vaccines, which insulates them from liability if something goes wrong, Johnson & Johnson. If we can create, if the medical lobby, the medical doctor's lobby, my brother's a doctor, if the medical lobby can, in Missouri, create limitations of liability for medical malpractice, right? My argument, or not my argument, my request is for not only the elected leaders like yourself, but for everyone who's interested in this topic of justice, of criminal justice reform, is you have to have either statutes, you have to have something, a bill, statutes on the books that insulate the small businesses who want to do the right thing but can't because they will go bankrupt if they do.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, and I want to carry that on because I think I have my next project for next year. Because I knew that there had to be something, and had I not been sitting here, I wouldn't have put that together to realize that is where probably a lot of that issue really lies. So let's see if we can fix it. Thank you.
I see there's a lot more questions out there. Thankfully, the happy hour is right after this, so we'll all have plenty of time to talk to each other. Greg is preparing his shepherd's crook over here, but we're going to take one more question on.
Well, since happy hour is right behind the corner, I'll keep it short. Randy Reinhardt with Zephyr Products. Zephyr has been in, it's a manufacturing operation. We currently employ close to 100 men from the Lansing Correctional Facility. To answer your question about insurance, yes, it is an issue. We've had the same insurance company, CNA, for 25 years, primarily because we have no other choice. It goes out every year we shop the market. CNA has been very good to us. They've also seen the experience we had. Our mod's very low, and so I think it's been good for both of us. But in the insurance world, they don't understand employing inmate employees.
Do they increase your premium?
Absolutely.
All right, well, as we wrap up, Grant, I just want to give you the last word on today's panel. What's on your heart, and what would you like to share with the crowd this afternoon?
Thank you. I've met several of you today. I've talked about different ideas and different things that you're doing and the community to try and make things better. A lot of you I've talked to have great ideas or are actually doing things and making progress in things, but the nuts and bolts of it is I haven't heard of you. A lot of the gentlemen here that I'm here with that were just released probably haven't heard of you. And at the basal level, if we don't know who you are and we can't get into your systems and we can't help and actually be a part of it, then it doesn't help us, and then we're not helping our communities. Let's find a way to come together, build systems that are intermingled with one another so that private industries on the streets can find value in this. We can do this in a more connected way. We have the technology, and we obviously have the support. So we can find systems to do it. Come see me afterwards. Come get my card. Let's talk about how to make it happen. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to the organizers, and thank all of you.
Thank you, Kyle and Grant and Andrew and Jim and Stephen and Nick for such an exciting panel. We've almost reached the end of our day. Everybody can take a collective breath and let it back out. So we have made it through the majority of the day, but our work would not be complete if we didn't take a few moments to just reflect on all of the things that we've talked about today, all of the different experiences that we've had. I hope that through today you are as determined as I am to see that this work is necessary, that we need more forums like this to be able to discuss these issues, that there are many things for each of us to do in order to move this work forward. I want to start by saying, reaching out from within as a sponsor, thank you to Kiki, thank you to Jim, the executive director, to the organization for being able to hold this type of event. If you're wanting to get involved with Reaching Out from Within by having that program come to your institution, by volunteering with the organization, by coming in and bringing your services to Reaching Out from Within, we would love to have you contact us. At the bottom of your program, on the back side, you see our website address, www.rofw.org. Please write us, contact us at that location, and we would be happy to respond to be able to see how we can get you involved. I have to give a shout out to all of our men and women in the correctional institutions that are watching. Anson and Craven down in North Carolina. Help me, Jeff, you might have to help me, but at Norton and Stockton and Larned and Ellsworth and Topeka and Hutchinson and Winfield and El Dorado and Lansing. I think I got them all in Kansas. Thank you, guys. At Lansing, I'll see you Wednesday night, so we will be there for our Reaching Out from Within meeting, and also those who may be watching in Missouri and Nebraska. We thank you for being here online and joining us there. As we wrap up, I just want to take a few minutes and get a feeling for the room. What are you sensing from this day? What did you get out of the day? What is your takeaway from today as we move forward and move on to our jobs, our lives, as we go back out, and as we prepare for next year's symposium that we'll start preparing for tomorrow after we enjoy tonight? What are your takeaways from today? What stood out for you today? Yes. Here you go, on a microphone.
Okay, speaking from both sides of the fence, as long as we got the heart and the collective and the know-how, change will come. And for people like me that's been on the other side, I'm very appreciative, and I will always keep growing thanks to all of you.
Thank you. She'll come back to you.
I got so much out of today, but one of the things tremendously encouraging was hearing on several panels the need to change the language. I'm going to give you a really brief example of how that works in my field treating substance use and mental health disorders. I had a young man that came to me for marijuana. He said, I don't know why I'm here. This is all BS. He got sent through an EAP. I went to prison back in the 80s. I said, wild horses couldn't have drugged me here. It'd probably been better than the 10 years I did in federal prison for growing marijuana. He said, okay. So he said, well, they're saying I'm an addict and I'm addicted, and I don't even agree with that. It's all crap. And I said, hey, we don't even use that kind of language. What we do is we kind of process it and talk about it, and we'll just see where you fall out in this. So he fills out a substance use disorder checklist, gets to the end of it, and I said, hey, it's like, says you're like 2 to 3 here, kind of a mild cannabis use disorder. I agree with that. That's exactly what I have. Okay? So what we do is we turn this around from calling people a label or giving them a definition, and just like the same thing with offenders in the criminal justice system, that used to drive me crazy. And so it's in the same context that we treat mental health disorders, okay? They are all there. Everybody at my practice, our practice, is a patient that we are treating for a medical condition that's called a behavioral health or substance use disorder. So I'm hearing the people talk about that in terms of that, and I want to leave this from the last time we were here. We talked about changing getting the law changed that allows people with a suspended driver's license to have a restricted license, and we actually got that done this last year, Senator Oletha Faust-Godot, but it never applied to people that were what they call habitual violators, and that never went through this year. And Representative Howe, I remember 15 years ago when this crazy drug offender registry came on the end of all the great sentencing reform work Kansas was doing, that was the opposite side of that and how that passed. So applaud to you for the changes that you're working on that and really getting back and looking at this in a more. So sorry to take up the time here, but I had to share that.
Thank you. Other takeaways? There was a lady over here that had one. Hope. Thank you. Hope, hope. Anybody else? Takeaways. What are you leaving with today? Yes, ma'am.
We still need to work on universal health care, because if you think about access to health care, you're talking about substance abuse or mental health care, and you got to talk about health care in general. There's a lot of people that end up in the system because they can't get adequate health care unless they go to emergency room. That's ridiculous. That costs all of us. So we got to figure that out, because it's not working. Our healthcare system isn't working.
Thank you.
That could be a good topic for one of your future sessions.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else have suggestions for? Yes, go ahead.
I think I don't have a takeaway per se. I think it's an ongoing takeaway to the work that we've been doing for 18 years now. When there was no word called reentry, there wasn't even a word. And to be able to have corrections, Department of Public Safety, and nonprofits in the same room discussing how we can create wraparound support people when people coming out. To create a word called second chances. I mean, that word wasn't even a word. It was like lock them up and throw away the key kind of thing, right? So to even have that conversation where we can have a diverse conversation in the same room about helping people who've kind of who need second chances and turn their lives around, I think that's just a continuing gotcha for me that that I appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Over here.
No, I think that I just want to say that it's important to be able to have these passionate discussions and have passion for this type of work without taking things personally. Yeah. And I think that's because, when you have people that are trying to come to mutually beneficial, decisions and policies who have traditionally been on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and those are some things that we've touched on when you're retraining staff or when you're trying to implement these changes in these institutions that have primarily been about punishment for hundreds and hundreds of years, really, then you have to be able to talk to people in a way that you got to learn how to speak the same language somehow, or you got to create a new language that both people are understanding. Because, one thing that I've learned just from coming out here after being in prison for 22 years is that if you're saying words that other people aren't understanding, then you're going to go nowhere. They're going to walk away from the conversation exactly the way they were, and you're going to walk away from the conversation extremely frustrated. And so you have to learn how to communicate to people without offending them and without belittling or demeaning their positions or their experiences. Some of these people have been in corrections for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and they've been doing things like that for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And if you come in here and you tell them, hey, you guys are wrong, everything you've been doing is not right, and you guys need to start doing things our way because we're smarter than you, and we know more than you, and we've experienced different things than you, it doesn't work well. And so you need to learn how to communicate to them in a way that's passionate, but where you don't take the rejection or the confusion or the resistance personally. And I think that's a very hard thing to do when something means something to you on both ends. And so I think these rooms are good because they're structured. This person gets a chance to speak, this person gets a chance to speak, and everybody else just listens. And that doesn't happen in everyday conversation very often, so it's important to take advantage of these opportunities and maybe use some of these on a smaller scale in order to solve these types of things. I know people do with town halls and stuff like that, but maybe like this room, nobody got argumentative, nobody got combative. If you did have a negative reaction to something, you kept it to yourself for the most part, which is what you have to do. And so I think that learning how to communicate with each other in these ways is extremely important. Otherwise, you're just going to have two separate camps, which is the biggest problem, I think, in our country when it comes to policy and change right now. So we have to try to avoid that as this keeps rolling and gains momentum and becomes bigger and bigger. Yeah. So that's kind of my takeaway from this whole thing.
Thanks, Danny. There was one in the back of the room, too. I think opening the communication lines definitely are what we're trying to do, get these conversations started and keep them going. Mr. Ogletree? Oh, I'm sorry, Marty. I didn't. I didn't see you, Marty. We'll come back up to you. Sorry about that.
No, you could have kept it with Marty. No, I was just going to say that continuing the information and sharing the information, I think Representative Owen mentioned it, that, you know, people outside of this realm don't typically get to hear the information, and there's a lot of myths in our community about this population, about a lot of things we deal with. So continuing putting that message out there so people can have a good base to understand the whole realm of the situation, I say. So we have to keep pushing the message out there to the general public so they can have an understanding of what's going on.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Which reminds me, so if you haven't done it already, if you would go to your Twitter or Facebook account and use this thing called a hashtag, which I'm still learning about, hashtag Courage to Change and ROFW 2020, that will get you on Facebook or Twitter, and the @ at reaching out from is Instagram, I believe. I'm not sure. You all know that better than I do. Marty, come on up. How do we get this out on social media? Richard can tell us.
Oh, hi. Yes, so we are on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm sure if you just type in Reaching Out From Within, it'll pop up. So if you're on any of those, if you have any questions you want to email in, our email is info@rofw.org. And it's on the sheet.
Thank you, Richard. But we would love to see some pictures, some comments about this. That's the one way to keep the conversation going and continuing it, and to also get that out to people who weren't here today. Marty, final comment or another comment?
I don't have enough energy to climb those stairs with you. The takeaway I have today is the same as I do anytime I'm in a room with all of you people. I've done this for a long time, and I don't know how many ex-offenders are in this room, but I know there's quite a few. Many of you I know. There might be a few I don't know. But you are the reason I do what I do. Those of you who have done time, you heal me. I don't heal you. And I will continue to do this. I've been thinking this might be the last year I can go inside. I hope it isn't. But if it is, know that you have been loved, and I will do it as long as I possibly can. And like I said, you're the reason why I do it.
I wasn't expecting that.
Marty's been going into the Kansas Department of Corrections for over 50 years as a volunteer. And it's because, I know she'll tell you that it's because of what she gets, not because of what she necessarily gives. But I thank you. And Marty has been a personal mentor to me. She's the reason I am part of this and going back in. I have a viewpoint from both sides also. Spending more than 20 years in prison, being able to see life from the inside. I often say now that I have 32 years in corrections. 20 of it happens to be as a resident from the inside, and the last 12 working on the outside, trying to help make a difference. And that knowledge is invaluable. The 20 years inside gave me insights that I now use to be able to help change the system, be able to tweak the system, be able to help people that have never been on the inside see what life is like on the inside when they're doing that work. So thank you to all of you in the room. Give yourselves a round of applause for being here and for supporting this work. And I guess I need to end by saying, if there's anybody that wants a go to jail free card, come up and get a business card because we will take you to prison anytime you'd like. If you'd like to visit a Reaching Out From Within program, we can get you into our Topeka facility with the women's program in Topeka, the men's program in Lansing, or any of the other prisons that I've already mentioned. I'm sure we can make that available to you with the help of the Kansas Department of Corrections. So thank you for that. Our hope is that you will continue past today to engage in this conversation, continue the dialogue, tweet, post, whatever the other things are that you need to do on social media, and we hope to see you at this event next year. Thank you for being here.